So, good morning, everyone, to this EU Clusters talk. We're focusing this time on renewable energy, on Repower EU. My name is Chris Burns, and I'm talking to you from the European Parliament here in Brussels, so there might be a bit of ruckus behind me, but I'll turn my mic off when it gets too busy. We'll be talking with a number of people from the European Commission, from the private sector, and that's all about this collaboration through this clusters program. This is a bi-weekly event by the European Cluster Collaboration Platform, the ECCP, on behalf of DG GROW at the European Commission. The format today, you can see there on your screen, we'll have some news, we'll have a video from our own correspondent, we'll have a presentation from the European Commission and a panel discussion, and then funding opportunities. A couple of tech tips. You can put your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom, or you can punch the button there to raise your hand if you want. Keep in mind the hashtag EU Clusters Talks, and this is, of course, recorded for playback. So why don't we get started with the news here? We're talking about support for Ukraine on energy equipment. And let's talk first to Gianmarco De Sogus, Program Officer at DG European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations, that's DG ECHO at the European Commission. Morning, Gianmarco.
Good morning, Chris, and good morning, everyone. Okay, thank you. So before illustrating more in details, also with the support of Irina Krimus from the Energy Community Secretariat, the process of donation of energy items under the European Commission, I would like to briefly describe the role of the European Civil Protection Mechanism. So first slide, please. So the European Civil Protection Mechanism was initiated in October 2001 with the aim to strengthen cooperation between the EU member states, and nowadays we count also 7 more participating states on civil protection. Basically, the principle behind it is that when we have an emergency that overwhelms the response capabilities of a country in Europe and beyond, this country can request assistance through the mechanism. So the European Commission plays a key role in coordinating the disaster response, but also contributing to the transport and/or operational costs of deployment. As you can see from the slide, the mechanism was activated over 600 times since 2001 in emergencies that ranged from natural disasters to pandemics, and even to conflicts, as in the case of Ukraine. Next slide, please. So after the Russian invasion, Ukraine has been sending several lists of needs to the European Commission. This list concerned also, of course, the energy sector by including mostly equipment needed to repair the existing Ukrainian energy system that has been damaged or destroyed during the war. Following a letter signed by both Commissioner on Energy Simpson and Commissioner on Crisis Management Lenarčič, the DG ECHO and more specifically the Emergency Response Coordination Center were selected as responsible services of the Commission to channel specific in-kind offers to Ukraine, also from private companies in the energy sector. This is why the European Commission is currently collaborating with the Energy Community Secretariat in a process of donation that involves also the national authorities of civil protection, which agreed to channel the offer on behalf of the private companies based in their respective countries. These deliveries are supported by the use of the European Civil Protection Mechanism logistics hubs that we have in Poland, Romania, and Slovakia, and the transport is financed 100% by the European Union. Later on, Irina from the Energy Community will explain a bit more in detail this process. Next slide, please. So as you can see from the slide, over 70 donations of energy-related items have been channeled by member states and participating states under the mechanism. Over 30 donations out of the 70 were channeled through the framework of cooperation between ECHO and the energy community. Next slide, please. So before giving the floor to Irina, I would like just to point out which are the most urgent needs of Ukraine in this moment. And I think that this aspect will be touched also later on. But as you all know, the Russian drone campaign caused around 30% of energy infrastructure loss in Ukraine. This means that hundreds of thousands of families and business are left without energy supply. This means no electricity, no heating, no hot water, no hot food. The winter is also approaching, and we know that in Ukraine temperatures can drop very low. And this means that Ukraine needs support. So donations of emergency energy equipment, donations of fuels and tools, everything is urgently needed to repair the damaged infrastructure and restore the energy supply. So as you can see from the slide, we have several items which are urgently needed from the Ukrainian authorities, which range from power transformers to generators, heaters, fuel and oils, tools, etc. It is then very important to map the landscape of private energy companies that are willing to donate to the Ukraine under the European Union. We have to pass the message that we have an already existing door-to-door transportation, which is free of charge and which is covered by the European Union. And so we have to invite the private companies to donate. I can assure you that in our recent meetings that we had with the Energy Ministry of Ukraine, but more in general with the authorities of Ukraine, there is a clear plea, which is energy, energy, and again, energy. I would stop here and I would leave the floor to Irina to complement my presentation. Over.
Thank you, Gianmarco, and thank you, colleagues, for today's discussion. Okay, I see now slides. So I will try briefly to explain the process. So from the beginning of the war, the Ministry of Energy of Ukraine approached Energy Community Secretariat to help physically with donations because they needed a lot of equipment, materials, and fuels. And upon the request of the ministry, the Ukraine Support Task Force has been established within the Energy Community Secretariat. And currently we are assisting with the donations of energy equipment to Ukraine. We are working with the Ministry of Energy, who is collecting the needs and the requests from the energy companies in Ukraine and aggregate it into the big list with Ukrainian energy needs. And we, in our turn, communicate this list with the donor companies in Europe. And then we serve as a coordination center to assist the donors with the donations. So we lead the donor companies from the beginning of the process of the confirmation of the items together with the ministry, and then with the help of Emergency Response Coordination Center up to the Ukraine. We are helping the donor companies to match the items that they can offer, that they have on their stocks with those that are requested by the companies in Ukraine. Once the items are identified, we are helping the donor companies to provide and to prepare the documents that are needed for logistics. So we assist them with all the paperwork, and then once the paperwork is done, we provide ERCC with all the requested documents that are needed for logistics. And then ERCC is providing its support with regard to the deliveries of goods to Ukraine. Currently, there are a lot of this list with Ukrainian needs, which is really increasing with every attack in Ukraine, and it's a live list. And every support and every donation is quite crucial to Ukraine. And here we are glad to support and to assist donors with these tasks together with our colleagues from ERCC. And we are in daily contact with Gianmarco actually, and it's a quite great help, and we are quite grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irina, and also to Gianmarco for your presentations. And in fact, as you might know, we adapt our format to the latest developments, and this is what we did with the ECCP News. We adapted that and brought on Gianmarco and Irina quickly to talk about this energy emergency that's going on in Ukraine and the help that they need as a result of these latest airstrikes on their energy infrastructure. Let's move on now, talking further about how do we accelerate this energy transition through Repower EU to greener energy. Let's move on to our video from our own correspondent, the Elbe Eurocluster. Here we go.
Good morning. This is Marco Suarez from the Basque Energy Cluster. I'm here with my colleague Ander Gonzalez.
Hello.
And we are reporting from the city of Bilbao in the beautiful but today a bit rainy Basque Country, which is a region in the north of Spain. We are the coordinators of the Elbe Eurocluster, which was selected as the main joint cluster initiative in the industrial ecosystem of renewable energies. An industrial ecosystem that is very relevant right now for Europe because of the energy transition and unfortunately also because of the energy independence due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Elbe Eurocluster is a partnership of 7 clusters. Besides us, we also have the Blue Cluster in Belgium, GC Node in Norway, Offshore Fast Rise in Sweden, Polmer Mediterranean in France, the Pomeranian Offshore Wind Platform in Poland, and Energy Cluster Denmark. The focus of Elbe is offshore renewable energy, so we focus in offshore wind and in ocean energies, wave and tidal, and also in other alternatives that are connected to the sea in energy, such as floating solar, offshore hydrogen, and so on and so forth.
As Marcos mentioned before, Elbe Eurocluster will improve the resilience of the European renewable energy industrial ecosystem with a focus on offshore renewable energy. Elbe, as an alliance, has been working since 2018 on developing a great cluster partners network with a focus on helping SMEs in their internationalization activities. Now, Elbe Alliance will start a new phase where it will develop new activities in the Elbe Eurocluster context.
Elbe Eurocluster will address all 5 challenges from the joint cluster initiative called Networking for Resiliency. One of the first things we are doing is working on a resiliency report that will identify key issues for the sustainability of the European value chain of offshore renewable energy. We will work also in networking events, at least in 7 in the framework of some of the key international events such as Wind Europe, Ocean Europe, the Floating Wind Turbine Conference, so that we can connect all the companies, all the organizations from these 7 clusters. In Innovate, we will contact key stakeholders, try to identify with them some of their strategic challenges, and then present the challenges to SMEs that will collaborate in identifying and developing solutions for these key customers. Adopt process and technologies for a greener and more digital sector is somehow embedded in all of the other activities we are carrying out.
Elbe Eurocluster will pursue different activities under another 2 topics. Training, where we will develop several courses to improve the management skills of the clusters. Also, several courses for the SMEs to improve skills in digitalization, sustainability, and new business models. Finally, continuing the Elbe Alliance work done the internationalization activities, Elbe Eurocluster will develop 3 business missions to international emerging markets in the offshore renewable energy.
We are looking forward to working in this exciting project, and we want to thank the ECCP for letting us share what we plan to do with all of you. Take care.
Agur.
Great. That was great. I liked all the guys with the surfboards. That was really wonderful. And the Basque Country was where I bought my first guitar, so my heart is very close to them. Yeah, let's move on now to talking further with the European Commission about this energy transition and how we can accelerate it. Jacek Truszczynski, Deputy Head of Unit at the Direct DG Internal Market Industry and Entrepreneurship and SMEs, that's DG Grow at the European Commission. Jacek, please. Good morning. Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry. Thanks, Chris, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. So indeed, just a few words about the current context of that policy and what are our plans for the coming weeks and months. I would say that, you know, there are two ways of approaching this question, I think, of how to speed up the uptake of renewable energy. Because one is how to accelerate deployment, how to install more windmills, solar panels, and so on. That's clear. You know, we already had some presentations on the context this morning. Ukraine, energy prices, we need to accelerate that. But there's another aspect here. It's how to also strengthen the supply chain of those technologies, how to make sure that we have the supply chains in Europe, because we see also with the current situation vis-a-vis Russia that we should not depend for those strategic technologies on foreign actors too much. And there's a real risk that the dependence that we have today on Russia for gas will be replaced by a dependence on China, notably with respect to heat pumps, PV panels, and wind technologies, batteries, and so on in the near future. So we have to avoid. And so us in DG Grow, we pretty much focus on the second aspect currently, so how to strengthen the supply chain and make sure that we have them in Europe. And you know, it's a challenging context that we are facing vis-a-vis that objective currently, because first, we have very high energy prices in the EU. And of course, that makes the case for investing in often rather energy-intensive processes challenging. The prices for energy that our companies pay today in Europe are 8 times higher than what their competitors pay in the US. That's the first aspect. The other aspect is that, you know, we want to reshore those supply chains for clean technologies, but other countries, other jurisdictions are doing exactly the same at the same time, and they are doing it often with a very ambitious policies. Notably, you might have heard in the US, the Biden administration is deploying the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, under which almost 400 billion euros will be channeled in through very generous subsidies to develop those supply chains there. And the third aspect of the challenging context is supply chain disruptions. Still, we are facing the post-pandemic situation where access to certain raw materials is and components is difficult, and that of course makes the emergence of new ecosystems challenging. So we face that challenging context, but we are not starting, of course, from zero. Europe is still a very strong actor in those technologies. If you look at the batteries, notably, in 2018 we have set up the so-called European Battery Alliance, with the ambition of becoming one of the main producers of this technology in the world, and we have succeeded. More than 120 billion euros have been mobilized in investments since then. We will soon have 30 gigafactories of batteries in Europe. So that is a success story that we want to build on. But still, even if you look at batteries, okay, the batteries are being made now in the EU, but we still depend for certain critical materials, raw materials that are necessary to produce those batteries on China. So this is something we have to address. Then if you look at solar, you know, in the 90s, we had a very strong solar industry, manufacturing industry in the EU, notably in Germany, but then it was moved to China. And now today, for more than 90% of solar panels, we depend on China. If you look then at wind and heat pumps, we had a presentation from Bilbao. That's a stronghold of the wind industry in Europe, and we are still the strongest actor on world markets. But if you look at trends, we are losing market shares, notably to China. And so we have to make sure that we maintain that excellence. So now just 2 words about how we want to go about that. And then I would be, interested to hear from you whether you think it's adequate or we really need more. So the first aspect that we do currently is permitting. So you would say permitting, to accelerate project deployment. It's really about deployment, not supply chains, but not only, because our industries, not only the wind industry, is suffering from a lack of sufficient projects in the EU, notably. And that's why the Commission has proposed to radically accelerate permitting procedures, shorten it from 7 years today to maybe 1 or maximum 2 years tomorrow to issue a permit and deploy a renewables project. So it's an issue of as much as climate as competitiveness, the permitting aspect. The second aspect, I mentioned the European Battery Alliance. We need those frameworks where we give long-term predictability to the industry, where we match project promoters with investors and so on. And so we have the Battery Alliance. We will now have a dedicated alliance for solar. We might have similar frameworks in the future for wind and so on. The third aspect are product standards, because we have to protect our excellence in certain environmental aspects of technology production. If you look at our solar panels or the other energy equipment produced in the EU, it's often its environmental impact is smaller than the one that is produced in China, notably because of our cleaner energy mix. So we have to set standards in the EU to make sure that products imported into the EU face the same level of requirements as those that are manufactured here. And so we have the eco-design framework where we set such standards. We have the battery regulation, and we will continue to do that. The fourth aspect is financing. I mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. We also are trying to increase the level of funds available in the EU for those objectives, and we do it notably through the recovery funds. We also have, I think, to somehow simplify access to finance, because we have a myriad of financing products in the EU at EU level, national, regional, and I think from a project developer perspective, it's often rather confusing. So we have to simplify. And final aspect, I mentioned the batteries. We produce batteries, but we still depend on the raw materials, and that's why we will soon put in place a new regulatory framework that will somehow drive that filière, let's say, the development of mining in the EU for critical materials, refining, and so on, to make sure that we have this also in the EU. So voilà, that's in a nutshell. And as I said, I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacek. Dziękuję bardzo. And to all of you, please do send in your questions via the chat, or you can also, of course, raise your hand if you want to pose a question. I got a couple of questions for you, Jacek, since we got a couple of minutes of time. And in my conversation ahead of time with the panel that you're going to hear from, one question raised was about what the Commission's policy is on geothermal energy. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think, well, I'm not an expert in that technology, but indeed, this is a technology that has great potential. And we don't have for the moment dedicated measures such as for batteries or solar to support that specific sector. But if you look at, for example, heat pumps, a lot of them are ground to air heat pumps, right? So using also geothermal energy. So for sure we will need to work more on that technology, but for the moment, as I said, no dedicated measures.
Okay, and then also we discussed about how we got a multi-speed Europe when it comes to making that energy transition. I've been to Poland, your native Poland, and they're not moving as fast as others, although they are trying to move to greener energy. They have geothermal as well. How does the Commission work to get everybody on board and help to accelerate with different EU members that are moving at different speeds?
Yes, well, I think if you look at Poland, indeed, I mean, still a lot of dependence on coal, and for many years, governments have been attached to that, and that is not the right direction. But you know, I think increasingly it's sinking in to everyone in Europe that we need to move towards decarbonization. And if you look at Poland, there has been an incredible boom over recent years in solar PV, not deployed by utilities, but individuals who see this as an opportunity to reduce their costs, you know. And I think that was the most dynamic market for solar PV in Europe in recent years. And so I think not only the environmental aspect, but the economic calculus will increasingly show that decarbonization is the way to go. And you know, if you talk about an economic calculus, you of course bring everyone on board, because then ideology, let's say, goes to the background. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is, of course, money. So basically, what Europe does, as always, is, you know, when there are differences, when someone needs more support than others, he receives that support. And so countries that depend more on coal get notably more funding through the emission trading schemes, through the way that allowances for emissions are distributed. And also we have dedicated funding programs such as the Just Transition Fund, which is specifically targeting those areas in member states that depend on coal to help them convert to new industries and new technologies.
Okay, great. Other questions coming up, but let me move on. It's great that all of you are with us on this EU Clusters talk on how to accelerate renewable energy. Your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom, raise your hand, hashtag EU Clusters Talks if here's something that you'd like to cast wider. Let's move on to the panel debate. How can we accelerate that technology uptake? Let's talk first to Frederick Lux, Managing Director of Flux 50. Frederick, tell us a little bit about your company and how you are trying to accelerate this.
Hi, Chris. Well, we are Flux 50, a cluster organization in Flanders, Belgium. And I'm managing a cluster of around 230 companies, new knowledge institutes, local authorities, where we're trying to accelerate that energy transition from, let's say, a system perspective. So for us, renewables are part of an energy system and need to find their space inside that energy system. And we are managing that cluster not only with the intention to accelerate that energy transition, but also to prove that there is economical value in it to gain for the companies and for the knowledge institutes. So I'm very happy that Jacek is also mentioning there the supply chains, the Battery Alliance, and to show that it's not only about ecology, but it's also about economy that need to cooperate in that.
Before we actually see a massive acceleration, do you already see since this energy crisis that we face since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, do you already notice a lot more members, a lot more interest in what you're doing?
Well, we see that at least in Flanders, we are one of the sectors that is coming out quite well out of the crisis, to call it like that. So when it comes to the amount of members, to the amount of activity, we can certainly not complain. If you compare it to other cluster organizations in Flanders, such as logistics or food, we are having more, let's say, a problem of a positive problem rather than a negative problem. But still, I can assess that quite of the things that have been mentioned, like supply chains and that kind of things, and also trained people, are, let's say, hindering the energy transition, the fast take-up of renewables. So at present, in our case, the demand is far higher than the supply chains are able to follow.
Can you mention like one example of how you're helping through that cluster constellation to facilitate that uptake?
Well, perhaps I can give you two examples.
Okay.
One is we are managing quite some collaborative projects between research institutes and companies. So one of the projects we are busy with is building digital twins for neighborhoods. where we can identify quite fast similar buildings in a certain neighborhood, and that we can approach them with, let's say, group purchase programs for renewables, for heat pumps, for solar panels, so that we have installation companies who can really approach a neighborhood rather than separate buildings. And on the other hand, we are also quite busy ourselves in teaming up a lot of installation course providers, not only in Flanders, but also internationally through collaboration with other clusters in international context, in order to create courses for those installation companies in order to help them accelerate the uptake. And that's typically done in, let's say, formats like Interreg collaboration. We have signed, just like the Blue Cluster that has been mentioned in the LB Eurocluster project context. We have signed up with Energy Cluster Denmark, Hamburg, Bremerhaven, just to create a network of clusters who are creating installation companies, courses, trying to get the supply chains in the North Sea region going. So you can see the teaming up there between different clusters. It's very important to bridge that international barriers that still exist, but that shouldn't exist in, let's say, issues that are transnational.
Okay, great. I want to come back to you, Frederick, but let me move on to Marcos Suarez Garcia, Basque Energy Cluster. You're the coordinator of the Elba cluster. That was a great video. What were all those guys with the surfboards? Were they all members of the cluster?
No, that was in fact a conference we had in the Basque Country last October. So one of the activities organized was surfing. It was a ocean energy conference, so surfing was kind of connected to the idea of the conference.
Right. So everybody should know these clusters can have a lot of fun as well. How are you accelerating things over there in the Basque Country?
Well, first of all, just a quick introduction of the Basque Energy Cluster. It's a very similar organization to what to Flux 50, what Frederick introduced. We are around 200 members in the north of Spain, in the Basque Country, working in the energy field. But one of our strong suits is precisely the wind energy sector, of the offshore renewable energy sector in general. To add on the examples, for example, that Frederick gave, because we do similar things, but for example, one thing we do is internationalization. We support our companies, because right now the good thing about the renewable energy sector is that it's, as Frederick said, it's a very interesting sector to be in. There's a lot of demand, not enough supply chain at some point, and that happens in Europe. And in the case of wind energy, we have the lack of being the worldwide leader in Europe in offshore wind mostly, and so we try to travel and to collaborate with American, Asian companies together with our members. So we bring our members to trade events. We help them connect with the local network. Right now, I'm in Japan with the Blue Cluster, that also again is a partner from the LB Alliance in an offshore wind conference. So that's one of the things we also do in the Basque Energy Cluster.
Okay, great. Let me quickly then move on to Mark Rechter, the board member of MCPV. So that's obviously solar power. Let's focus on that right now, Mark. How do we accelerate that now through the clusters?
Oh, thank you very much, Chris. And so MCPV is doing what I think Jacek was indicating before. We're trying to accelerate the supply chain, the European supply chain, specifically by developing and implementing and operating gigawatt scale PV cell and module manufacturing plants a little bit, well, not a little bit, throughout Europe, in three European countries specifically. So we identified about 3 or 4 years ago that this was going to be a crucial, let's say, energy security risk, apart from also addressing European industrial, let's say, renewal, if you like. If we look at Europe's industry today, it's highly energy dependent, and a lot of that energy is currently coming from outside of Europe. And I think that's one of the, or those are two of the crucial risks that Europe faces now immediately, which is this extreme energy dependence on sources outside of Europe, as well as a lack of industry within Europe that addresses the energy transformation. So this is one of the topics that drives our goals, so to speak, and it's been quite a journey, because back in 2019, when we mentioned that we were going to develop 15 gigawatts of annual PV capacity cells and modules in Europe, most people were kind of laughing at us, thinking, well, isn't that done in China, and can we ever compete in Europe? And of course,
but you did it.
Yes,
we did it.
Yes. Well, we're doing it. We're
okay,
doing it, and
on the way.
yes, indeed. Thank you.
But what about I mean, supply chain? Can you be more specific about how you're addressing that supply chain issue?
Yes, absolutely. So it's scaling up to very large industrial scale in Europe is not something that any single company can do by itself. It is very important that we build the supply chain, that we build the value chain in Europe, which is quite a bit of a challenge, because we basically need to coordinate with our upstream and downstream supply chain partners. So it's our clients as well as our suppliers. Let's say the combined risk of making very substantial investment in productive assets. And so the challenge in that is on the one side, timing, because everybody ideally should scale up, along the same timeline. And at the second level, it is indeed raw materials, because at the end of the day, everything consists of raw materials, and we need to make sure that we have those. Now, the good thing is in solar PV is that we have those raw materials in Europe, so we can be independent. We just need to scale up, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
Okay, good. That gives a bit of hope. Let's move on to Sean Finlay over in Ireland, Director of Geoscience Ireland. How are things going over there as far as developing? And there's plenty of parts of Europe. I mentioned Poland. Of course, we know other parts of Europe that have geothermal energy. How is that going for that in the transition to renewable energy?
Good morning. Thank you, Chris. Just before I talk about geothermal energy, it's worth noting that our potential in Ireland for offshore wind energy is immense. Our land area is 10 times bigger, 10 times smaller than our marine area. Should put it the other way. Our marine area is 10 times bigger than the land area. And there's potential there to produce up to 80 gigawatts of electricity, which of course we don't need in Ireland, would need to be transported to Europe. So
that means there's a grid issue too. We got to talk about it.
Definitely a grid issue, and I was very interested to hear the comment from our colleague in DG Grow about permitting issues. We have that here too. There is a major overhaul of our planning system underway and likely to come before Parliament before the end of the year. And that's absolutely essential, as is the upgrading of the grid, and of course connectors to mainland Europe and to Britain as well. And there is a connector underway between France and Ireland, and I think that's extremely important. But as you said, Chris, our internal grid needs to be strengthened as well. On geothermal energy, again, I was interested to hear your question to DG Grow.
As we had discussed in advance about the geothermal issue. Yeah.
That's right. Well, I'm glad to know that the Renewable Energy Directive does include mention of geothermal energy as a vector, but I am disappointed to hear that there are no dedicated measures in DG Grow as yet, and I think it's an area that could be very legitimately included in the renewable energy mix. It's already a feature in parts of European countries. In Sweden, about 60% of district heating comes from geothermal energy, and Sweden is not seen as a country traditionally as being very well endowed in that regard. In Paris, I think it's either 1 million homes or 1 million people have enjoy district heating from geothermal energy. Also in Italy, Turkey, and Germany. So the potential is there. I think the big problem with de-risking geothermal energy is data. Good data always de-risks any project. And I think there is a role for the Commission and for local national governments to get more information on the subsurface by carrying out seismic surveys and by carrying out drilling projects. Without data, your risks in every area increase. We are very pleased to be.
I suppose there's also a grid issue there too, right? Because you got to bring the grid to those places where there is geothermal energy, right?
Yeah, I think it's probably less acute. You're right, but I think it's less acute in mainland Europe than we have on the island of Ireland. We are very pleased to be part of the European project called Energy Europe 2, which is managed by COSME. And the objective of that is to understand opportunities for European SMEs to develop business in geothermal energy in 4 selected markets. Our ability to deliver that project has been greatly constrained by our inability to travel in recent years, but we have market study visits to Kenya, Chile, Canada, and at the moment underway to Costa Rica to learn how the geothermal energy sector has developed in those countries. The other European project on geothermal energy, which is hugely important, is the European Technology and Innovation Partnership project on geothermal energy, which looks at the challenges and opportunities that we need to address to develop this sector.
What percentage of Europe's energy could be generated by geothermal in your dreams?
Well, there's varying estimates, one by Rystad, which suggests that 8% of global electricity could come from geothermal energy, which is not insignificant. In Europe, I think it could be as high as 10%. So it's not a silver bullet, but it is part of the mix, and because it's readily available and it's in our own territories, and it echoes what Jessica was saying about having reliable sources within our own jurisdictions in Europe. I think it really should be pursued a bit more vigorously.
And you mentioned with wind, there are some regulatory issues. What about with geothermal? Are there regulatory issues to overcome on that?
There are, but we have a regulatory review underway, and we're expecting legislation next year.
Okay.
These are not hugely difficult issues. I mean, it has been done in mainland Europe. It's been done recently in Alberta, where they've introduced a Geothermal Regulation Act. So we can learn from the experiences of others and move along briskly, I hope, with regard to the regulation landscape.
Yeah. Okay. Just once again to invite everyone to put your questions into the chat. It'd be great to get some of your questions. Frederick, I want to go back to you because we're mentioning about the regulatory issue, and I know that there is resistance from some localities, not in my backyard, not in my beach, not out in my sea, regarding the wind turbines. How much are you dealing with that? How much is that an impediment for you? Oh, can you turn on your mic, Frederick?
Well, it's a very important element since it's hindering a lot of the development of renewables uptake, both onshore and for offshore wind. So what you can see in onshore wind, it's a typical not in my backyard syndrome. Nobody wants to have, everybody wants to have more wind energy in the grid, but nobody wants to have a windmill near his own house, near any airport, and so on and so on. So you can see that in the last years, we are lagging seriously behind in development of onshore wind compared to the plans. And yeah, in large regions of Flanders, there have been permits for 2 windmills. Yeah, and you can see whenever when we start a project, you can see a lot of complaints from different entities who are saying, okay, we shouldn't do solar panels because we have some issues with let's say how it looks or whatsoever. Also
Right.
from heritage perspective. On the other hand, you can see that when you do offshore wind, that typically in our case, the demand is not really with the fishes or with the coastal area, so we need to bring it to the inner land, and it takes a lot of time to create that infrastructure. So only yesterday there was an expert opinion for the 3rd time in the Flemish region telling that we should have a high voltage line as a line and not underground HVDC. But still you can see that it will take, I guess it will take 6 to 10 years before we can actually have it built. So it's not only about having the permits for the windmills, which offshore is in Belgium not the most difficult thing, but it's also for all the infrastructure that is coming around it. And yeah, that will be a major problem when we want to go to energy transition. We will need to take a very different look on how we connect electricity, but also heat, how we connect everything together. The infrastructure will need to have a very important upgrade and will need to go to places where we haven't gone before.
Sorry, go ahead, finish your thought.
In our case, as it has been pointed out, 90% of the energy at this moment is imported through gas, LNG, whatever you want to name it. So everything at this moment from infrastructure is based on an import view by the harbors, by the harbor of Antwerp, Bruges, and Ghent. So all infrastructure is linked to that perspective, while in a decentralized network, it will be a very different case.
If it gives any hope here at the European Parliament that I'm where I am right now, I hear a lot of talk about burning some red tape, about cutting the red tape when it comes to the regulation, when it comes to trying to install renewable energy, when it comes to wind, especially with wind.
I agree, and we also should take a look at the infrastructure. I would definitely argue to also take up infrastructural works in that equation of permitting. And what we face in Flanders, in Belgium actually as a whole, is that most politicians also want to be re-elected. That's one of their prime concerns actually, and they don't want to go against the population that could vote based on what happens in their backyard. So it's a very difficult discussion where the actual permitting process is only part of the entire equation.
Can I pitch over to Marcos? Over in the Basque Country, and you're talking about how it's a big wind producer, wind generator. How much are you facing there, and how much is the local government perhaps facilitating that? Could that be an example for other parts of Europe?
No, well, first of all, I have to say that we are a big wind industry, but not a wind producer. So the Basque Country has a lot of mountains, not much space for wind farms. But in fact, we have now a few. We're building a few with not many turbines, but we are facing the same problems. And in Spain, in general, is now offshore wind is starting to develop in the first phases, and we're having the same issues. And with local population, with the fishing industry, which of course, we have to understand their position. But we at some point, I think, at the European level, I think we have to realize that the energy transition is now becoming urgent. So we have to start at some point even overriding public interest, so that we can really speed up the numbers of installations. We really have to overcome these problems we have with installations, which are fully understandable, but But really, I was seeing right today in the conference I'm attending here some numbers about the installation of offshore wind worldwide towards being carbon neutral in 2050 in the world. And it was, I think we are installing like 6 gigawatts now every year, and we have to install like 50 gigawatts, I think, in the next decades per year. So we are talking really, really big numbers. We have to speed up really, really quickly.
Yeah, Mark, can I pitch over to you about PV, and there was just mention about regulatory barriers for that as well, maybe local resistance. How much are you dealing with that as well?
Well, we are looking to produce PV cells and modules, and of course, then there are other companies that will lay them out. There's a lot of effort now to simplify permitting in terms of the implementation of PV plants, of PV projects. What I would like to mention is that what we also need, we need to really accelerate industrial scale-up of PV, wind, batteries, etc. And there we have to deal with permitting issues. And these permitting issues are also a bottleneck. So I would include in the dialogue that we need to also accelerate the industrial building permitting process. It's very important because basically we don't have time. And I'd like to make a point about the urgency of timing that we have. In the context of multiple topics, it's not just the current energy crisis in Europe. It is very much also the competitivity of Europe, of its industry, of its existing industry and its new industry coming up. With the packages that we see in China, in the US, in India, and also in Canada, Europe is becoming, let's say, very uncompetitive from an investor perspective. The investment money is flowing to these other countries because they have put in place very aggressive packages in support of the energy transition industry. So really producing the stuff that we need to deploy. So it is absolutely urgent. And I would say we need to have it in place in the first quarter of 2023. A package that is both policy instrument and support instrument driven, that can allow Europe to compete with these other geolocations globally. And I would say that is one of the biggest challenges that we face right now, and we don't have time. And so message to the policymakers, let's
well, I was about to tap Jacek. Jacek, are you available there? Can you answer that policy question? Is that possible? Are you there?
Yes. Thanks for those comments. Very interesting discussion. No, I think we are fully aware of the situation. I think this awareness is increasing among member states. Recently, there was a proposal by Vice Chancellor Habeck from Germany to establish some kind of a mechanism at EU level to support those green industries. So I think if you look at the climate and energy policies deployed over the last 15 years, Europe was quite ambitious, but this industrial dimension was really lacking there. And I think now there's increasing awareness that we need to advance on that as well. Now, I can't promise that Europe will be able to have a program as generous a financing program as the Inflation Reduction Act. We have our constraints in Europe, notably in terms of state aid, because of the way the EU is organized. So, 50% subsidies for mass production of equipment. I'm not sure that we will see this in Europe, but we can have a comprehensive policy package, including some financing, including product standards, including matchmaking, including permitting, and so on. And I think if you put this in a comprehensive package and you show to the industry clearly and to the investors where we want to go, and that this is an objective for the EU, then you will have some results on the ground as well.
What about on the regulatory aspect? Because if you do propose something about cutting some of that regulation, there does seem to be an atmosphere here at the European Parliament that is for that. that is reducing that regulation to speed that transition to cleaner energy?
Yeah, I mean, you have to reduce some of the regulation, but you need also to, regulation can be also good. So
yeah,
if you talk about permitting, of course, yeah, there's a clear drive, and there will be new proposals soon from the Commission to speed it up. But we also need regulation like product standards to ensure that, the environmental excellence of our manufacturers, notably of PV panels in Europe, is given a real market value through this regulation, that we don't simply import Chinese products that are less durable, have a higher carbon footprint, and so on.
Sure. What about the grid? I'd like to discuss a little bit about the grid and what efforts there are to it's a big issue trying to establish a grid EU-wide that can help to transport that renewable energy. Would somebody like to talk about that? Well, Jacek, first, would you like to expound a little bit on that?
I could say that Europe has been financing development of grid for years, notably through the so-called Connecting Europe facility. But there's an aspect of permitting, as was mentioned in the panel today as well. And so far, the permitting proposals that have been put in place recently by the Commission concerned really electricity generation from renewables, not grids. And grids is a big issue as well. But I think that's on the radar of our colleagues from DG Energy. So I think you could expect something on that front as well soon. It's a big issue for sure, yes.
Great. Let's see. Can we get any more input from maybe Frederick? Do you have anything more to say about the grid before I move on?
Well, what we see is that when you try to engage with the local population, when you put them also central, like we do in cooperative kind of mechanisms, that it helps, that typically the resistance is lower. So there is a difference between the big infrastructure works, which typically involve offshore wind, and let's say smaller scale activities like PV, that kind of stuff. It's typically easier to get that going and to involve the citizen itself in the entire process, and then he sees his gains, so he is more less reluctant to investments in the grid. So I think that there is it will be very difficult in European context to go against the citizen. I think it's better to engage the citizen and try to convince them that it's for his own good. And if he is able to get his fair share of the gains of such a new system, I think that might work. But that goes a little bit against the existing market design of electricity market. And the other thing I would like to stress is that at this moment, more than 80% of the energy use is still not electricity, but is really heat related, or it's other kind of energy related. We will see that electricity part will increase severely. And then I'm also talking about EV, electric vehicles, and that kind of stuff with their own network. But we also need to take into account that we will need infrastructure for those other things like heat, like hydrogen molecules and whatsoever, in order to have a complete energy system. And I think that also in that sector coupling, there is a lot to do from an infrastructural point of view. When it comes to the PV panel production, I would like to stress that we are very good in creating that first pilot line. And actually, in the first years of PV, SMA was one of the large producers. We had 2 or 3 companies also in the Flemish region, which were really top notch in producing PV panels back in 1990. Actually, I bought still some furniture and equipment from the bankruptcy of one of those production plants. So we do have the skills, but in the end, for investors, it's about the bottom line and how you handle it, whether it's through operating grants or whether it's through higher prices, import taxes, whatsoever. In the end, it will come down to the bottom line, and that's the policy that needs to be set if we want to revive
Right.
industry within the European region.
I got a couple of questions coming in on infrastructure. Let me give you one of them from Alison Hunter. Connecting energy infrastructures across member states surely requires that member states build this approach into new infrastructure and into upgrading existing infrastructure. However, we still see member states adopting national approaches. How can RRPs address this? What else is needed at an EU level? Who would like to answer that? Don't all jump at once. Any ideas at an EU level?
I can jump on it in the Renewable Energy Directive that is coming. There is actually the need to create, for example, investment plans on the area of a bassin, of sort of the North Sea region or the Baltic Sea region, and not anymore on on a national level. And you can see that at that level, people are really working together. So when it comes to the North Sea region, you can see the Esbjerg declaration, and then the follow-up by some clusters that we should work together also to make that Esbjerg declaration also happen into practice. So for offshore wind, I don't see too much a problem over there, since we all are facing the same problems. And I think that having a common pain, to call it like that, helps collaboration.
Okay, all right. Sean, I see you raising your hand. I also see Mark, but Sean first. Yep.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on the regulatory side. I think we have much to learn from the United Kingdom on the regulation side for offshore wind. They have a one-stop shop called the Crown Estate. And that enables a developer to deal with all the aspects of the development, the grid, the permitting, the ecological, environmental aspects. So I think other member states could, I know Britain's not a member state anymore, but other member states could learn from that. And it's something that we're trying to replicate in Ireland by virtue of creating a marine agency, a marine area, a regulatory authority. In relation to the grid, and I was interested in the comments from our colleague in Flanders, opposition to power lines. Perhaps we have to look at more costly arrangements, namely underground direct current.
It's a lot more expensive, isn't it? I forgot.
A lot more expensive.
Multiple times.
It is, and obviously that affects competitiveness. But it is worth noting that the Suez project in Germany, which is 700 kilometers from North Germany to South Germany, involves an underground cable. There'll probably be some opposition to that, but I don't think it'll be as difficult as trying to do a 700 kilometer, 400 kVA overhead line. So I think that's something that we may have to look at.
Okay, all right. Malka, and if you could expound on that as well.
If you don't mind, Chris, I'd just like to react a little bit to Jacek's earlier comments. And this is not against Jacek, but I generally miss a sense of urgency in the dialogue in Europe. And let me explain why. The energy transformation is in full speed right now, but it's not in full speed in Europe. It's in full speed in many other places in the world. And this is a huge problem because there are extremely restricted volumes of resources that go into this transformation. And if Europe does not have a competitive framework to compete at the global level, Europe will not be able to compete because the order books of the machine manufacturers that produce the machines, that produce the components that go into the implementation of the energy transformation, these order books will be full of orders from China, from India, from the US, from Canada, and not from Europe. And those order books will be full for the next 5 to 7 years, and Europe will be unable to implement its industrial transformation. So I really miss the sense of urgency we have 3 to 6 months to put this framework in place, to bring certainty to investors, to bring certainty throughout the value chain. And I really miss this. I'm sorry, but I had to say this.
Well, before we get feedback from Jacek there, Marcos, you had something to add there. With the mic on, please.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I completely share Mark's comment about the sense of urgency. I wanted to add, I think, on a similar note, and we've been traveling a lot worldwide because of offshore wind. It's a huge trend everywhere, and everywhere we go is local content rules. So I'm here in Japan. I saw today is 60% for 2040. I was in the US a few months ago, same story, and you know, that does not mean that they are not open to collaboration. They are completely open, and we are completely, you know, glad with the collaborations we're having with Asian and American partners. But at the same time, we are, when I get back to Europe, it's like, why don't we have this type of, I'm not saying Spanish local content, of course, I'm saying European local content. And maybe for offshore wind, it's even less relevant than maybe for other sectors who might benefit more from a push of the European industry in that sense.
Well, you know, that's what these clusters are all about, right? These cluster talks are exchanging ideas and giving feedback to the Commission about what needs to be done. Jacek, can you answer a bit of that?
Chris, just let me finish.
Okay, yeah, please.
No, yeah, just by saying that I was quite happy to hear all of Jacek's comment in the beginning, because I think that was very positive for the sector. So I'm just trying to be constructive.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is all constructive, I think. Jacek, what do you think?
Well, I would say that there is a sense of urgency, but you know, in all honesty, Europe has certain constraints. We have 27 member states. The machine grinds often slowly, and I agree with you. Sometimes we have to accelerate, and in this case, we need to accelerate. I mentioned best practice examples and success stories that we can build on. The Battery Alliance is clearly a success story, and we will try to replicate it for solar with the means that we have, and we will notably try to put pressure where we can to simplify, for example, state aid rules, to accelerate how fast state aid is approved, to have a flexible interpretation. What is innovation, for example, because, you know, the Commission often interprets innovation only as technology innovation. We need also process innovation for those gigafactories and have state aid for that. So we will be putting pressure on that. Regarding local content requirements, I sometimes have the impression that we are the last of the Mohicans, you know, in the world regarding compliance with the WTO rules and so on. And, you know, we still have a very export-oriented industry. So there is rationale to be attached to those international rules. But we also have to be smart about those things. When we see that the US has local content requirements, has Buy American, not speaking of what's happening in China or India, we also have to have a more aggressive and assertive approach, possibly within existing rules, but still, you know, for example, currently we will be working on guidance for non-price criteria in auctions for clean power. That's something that the wind industry notably has been calling for. This is not local content requirements necessarily, but still this is something that could give a competitive edge to our industries versus competitors from outside of the EU. So, you know, this ship is navigating, it's a big ship, you know, sometimes it takes time to change course, but it's starting to change course a little bit.
Great.
Hopefully going in the right direction.
Yes, absolutely. Jacek, thanks, and thanks to all the speakers. I think at this point, thanks for going overtime on this, because it was a very important conversation to follow through on. And I think at this point, now it's time to get a few minutes from Nina Hoopman, a team member of the European Cluster Collaboration Platform on funding opportunities. Nina, please.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you everyone, to all the speakers, for the interesting discussion.
Absolutely, it's very informative, very good.
Definitely. As always, we like to close our EU Clusters talk with some funding opportunities that we would like to share with you. So in case you have not seen it yet, the second round of the Interact Baltic Sea Region 2021-2027 funding is out. So this is funding to public and private players around the Baltic Sea who want to shape their region in the following 4 priorities that are for the next funding round: innovative societies, smart water societies, climate neutral societies, and cooperation governments. Deadline to submit the idea forms for smart projects is the 5th of January, and the final application on the 26th of January 2023. And you can find the call published on interact-baltic.eu. My colleague will put the link in the chat for you to click on. We have a call open for integrated wind farm control. The projects responding to this call should contribute to the development of open source data-driven tools to decrease energy costs in operation, develop digital and physical tools to allow operators to make better formed decisions, and to contribute to the LCOE reduction. The deadline for this call is the 10th of January 2023, and it's a Horizon Research and Innovation Action. It is published on the Funding and Tenders portal. Just click on the link in the chat in case you're interested in this. The call is open for the efficient and circular artificial photosynthesis. So the projects should contribute to provide solar fuel breakthrough solutions towards a fossil-free economy, increase European technology competitiveness in solar fuel technologies, and develop artificial photosynthesis solutions. Deadline for this call is also the 10th of January, as it's the Horizon Research and Innovation Action. You can also read here the topic ID in the chat to directly look for it, and it is published on the Funding and Tenders portal. And last but not least, the Innovation Fund large-scale projects might be of interest for some of you. It is for clean tech manufacturing proposals, so to innovate clean tech manufacturing of components for hydrogen production, renewable energy, and energy storage. There's a call for mid-sized pilots to support highly innovative, disruptive, or breakthrough technologies in deep decarbonization, general decarbonization to stimulate the construction and operation of innovative renewable energy and energy storage technologies, as well as innovative electrification in industry and hydrogen. The call deadline is the 16th of March 2023 from the Innovation Fund lump sum grants, and also published on the Funding and Tenders portal. So click on that in case you're interested. Thanks, and back to you, Chris.
Great, Nina, thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for participating. There's a lot of good information there in the chat. Don't miss that. And if you like this chat today, please do register for the next ones coming up, as you can see there on your screen, and register for the Clusters platform as well to stay on top of those developments. This is the EU Clusters Talk, a bi-weekly event by the European Cluster Collaboration Platform on behalf of DG GROW at the European Commission. This has been recorded, and we'll have a report on that afterward. Hashtag EU Clusters Talks for anything you'd like to cast wider from this conversation today. I'm Chris Burns. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.